Okay, so my presentation is titled Why Design Matters in Business. I'd like to preface this is kind of different from the tones of the previous presentations. I'm focusing less on the coursework so much as common themes that I've kind of cemented as my own personal philosophy through the courses I've taken. So the agenda for today is that I'll start off with an overview of my background, talk about design, talk about opportunities in business, and then I'll conclude. So overview. So who am I? So I am a triple major in business, computer science, and Japanese. Two of the business courses I've taken that is relevant to this course thread are Innovation and Design Thinking in Business, which is a class that focuses on learning the design process and how that is relevant in sort of new product development. Another course I took was Virtual Communities and Social Media, which is like a class that gave insight on how technology has affected society. In computer science, two of the courses I took were user interface design and critical making. In user interface design, the emphasis during the semester I took it was on developing an app for a smartwatch. So it came with a kind of a different experience because the way people interact with like a phone for mobile apps is completely different from what you want on a smartwatch based on display, purpose, how people treat watches, how people are approaching the smartwatch, since that's a relatively new sort of product that people are using now. Critical making is a class that Sangeeta is also in right now. Definitely one of my favorite classes at Cal. As she mentioned, is like a class where you get sort of 5 students with interdisciplinary backgrounds and make products that kind of have like a critique on society. Lastly, I don't totally want to leave out my Japanese major, but it's not 100% relevant. Sort of what Japanese kind of like influenced me in my thinking is like Japanese aesthetics, concepts such as like wabi-sabi focus on minimalist design and design that is imperfect but still kind of evokes certain emotions. So what I would like to focus on are the intersection between like business, computer science, and how the design in computer science kind of is important to business. So I'll start off looking at design. So what is design? Design, when you think of design, sometimes you just think of fonts, typefaces. Like these are choices that you make to make something more readable. Sometimes you might think about logos. Logos like have a certain cultural value as well as they represent like certain points in history and design principles of that time. Some people think of design as graphic design, just making things that look nice. Some people think of design as architecture, which is kind of like all the philosophies that lead to making things human-centered in terms of buildings. So I'm going to go over a few definitions of design. I'm not going to try to say what design is so much as I just want to, like as Sangeeta mentioned, like there's no set definition of design. Design is design, but people have different perspectives on what design is. So from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, design is to plan and make decisions about something that is being built or created, to create the plans, drawings that show how something will be made. Pretty straightforward definition about design from a more like just what is the act of designing. Another perspective is from John Maeda, who is former president of RISD and then currently in KPCB. And he says that a designer is someone who constructs while he thinks, someone for whom planning and making go together. Lastly, I'm going to have a definition of design in contrast to art. I'm not saying whether I agree or disagree, just another interesting perspective from fashion designer Yoji Yamamoto. So he said, an artist is somebody who creates things that you don't need to have. So whereas art in its nature is more like critical of society, design is something that people tend to believe involves human aspects in terms of making things more efficient, but design art, there's a difference, there's similarities. I don't have a clear definition for how they differ. So now I move on to some opportunities of how design is relevant in business and what I think, why I think design will continue to be relevant in the future. So when people think of design in business, people think of design firms such as IDEO, which focuses on using the design process, using user interviews and prototyping and iterative process to sort of develop their designs. So a quote from their website. It's saying whenever a company designs a new product, service, or experience, it's essentially designing its business. So here I just would like to emphasize that whereas business is something you think of like a more procedural process such as finance, accounting, like bookkeeping, marketing, but design is a little bit more like, it's a bit of a new concept in business, focusing on how a business thinks less about how to generate profit from an objective standpoint, but what they can do to sort of entice people to buy into their business. So some examples of like where I think design is used in business are like sites like Pinterest, which focuses less on like trying to have any procedural concept, but just allows people to self-explore, find interesting things. Another is Etsy, which is sort of a marketplace where people can just make stuff and sell it. And lastly, from here on, I'm going to talk about the future landscape of design and business and where I think it's sort of going. So with this, I would like to take Medium as kind of like an example that I thought fit really well. Like blogging is something that has been around like basically from the beginning of the internet. When people first like had the internet, they wanted to like, it was text-based, people just wanted to write things down, share information. But recent trends in blogging have shifted more towards design aspects. It's about having easy user interfaces, having things that just aesthetically look nice. Another interesting thing I kind of want to look at are how there are many products that do the same thing, like Viber, WhatsApp, Snapchat, Messenger, iMessage. These are all used to communicate. They have slight variations, but in general, they are used to like talk to someone else over a network. And there are reasons why there are different apps, but at the same time, it's like, what about the app's design makes one succeed over the other or gains more users? Lastly, sort of where I see the future landscape of design business sort of going is the concept of Internet of Things. As people begin to make more products, it's sort of less focused on functionality. Well, functionality is still important, but design is something that becomes a lot more important. Products are being made that are interacting with us in ways that we have never interacted with them with. Like a component of internet is brought into these products. And I think it will be very interesting to see sort of how this affects the future landscape of design and business and where we see it going. So now I'll just sort of conclude with the statements of how I kind of synthesize all this. And I would say that design is slowly becoming much more relevant at the start of a business, and business must be cognizant of design throughout the entire process. Design is not just an afterthought, it's the starting point of where a business goes. You can't just like saying, okay, functionality, 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 okay, let's slap on the design. Design is something I believe that is at the root of a business, and this is something that's becoming a lot easier to recognize as we have more technology and, for example, more design people in the tech industry. So yeah, that's my presentation. Yeah.
So how does Wabi Sabi, how can you fit that into design? Because Wabi Sabi is, I'm not sure I completely
Yeah.
understand, but sort of like the beauty of imperfection.
It's
That's the
yeah, you can't really describe it in like one phrase,
yeah.
but it is the sort of the beauty of imperfection, coldness, sort of like a loneliness, but it still has some sort of aspects of mystery. That's just sort of one of my like guiding principles to my design philosophy. I like making things like both very straightforward, but also have sort of a sense of wonder to it.
Do you have any thoughts as to, could you speculate as to why, you brought up some of the social media apps. When you think about like, why is one more successful than another from a design perspective, what kind of things do you end up thinking about in terms of like, why, Viber, Snapchat?
Okay. So I would say it's both timing, like when they enter the market, as well as how much design is part of their culture. A lot of startups nowadays are, like the first person they'll hire will be the engineer. but the second person they would hire would be a designer. And this is something that's becoming a lot more common. So there's a lot of apps that have a functionality that is not met by anything else, but the user experience is just very terrible, not intuitive, but people just deal with it because that's what they have.
Right.
And that is an opportunity for businesses that are much more design focused to capture the market later, even if they do not have a first mover's advantage. So I would say mainly just that how much design is a core principle of the business.
You have a sense, would you be willing to say which one of those companies is gonna last the longest? Of the ones that you have there, Snapchat and Viber and all those?
I would say one thing for sure is just based on how many, like at least from a US perspective, and how many iPhones people have, and it seems to be a standard that people are not willing to give up, given that Apple has a lot of really good user interface. I would say people in general will be using like their iMessage to communicate like as we go on. But also really interesting, I think as a case study that I haven't fully deeply delved into is Facebook. I feel like Facebook is one of those companies where as much as they do have design in there, I question their design choices. A lot of the times I feel like I have to adjust to things that aren't necessarily better, but I can't help it because Facebook has such a large like market share in terms of social media. It's like I don't like how they do like their updates and what changes, but I can't help it because I'm kind of at their whim.